In the late 1800s, on the edge of the vast American frontier, a young man named Thomas Hale lived alone near a quiet canyon. His cabin was built with rough logs standing a little away from the main trail. Life out there was not easy. The land was dry and the wind carried sand across the rocks, but Thomas had grown used to silence. He hunted, fished, and set traps to survive. Every sound in the wild had meaning to him: the rustle of a rabbit, the cry of a hawk, or the faint step of a deer. Thomas was not like the loud men who sometimes passed through the land. He didn't drink or talk much. He spent most of his days repairing his traps, cleaning his rifle, or walking along the stream near the canyon. He had learned to live with the land, not against it. People who saw him called him quiet, even strange. But to Thomas, silence was not strange at all. It was home. One cool spring morning, a soft mist hung over the stream. Thomas woke early just as the sun was rising. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The ground was still damp from the night. The birds had just started to sing, their calls echoing softly through the canyon walls. Thomas picked up a small metal pail and his hunting knife, then started walking toward the stream where he had set a large trap the night before. He was hoping to catch wild turkey or maybe a small deer. That would be enough food for many days. As he walked, he moved carefully, stepping over dry branches so they wouldn't snap. Every hunter knew that the forest had ears. If you moved carelessly, you scared away everything before you even arrived. The stream was not far, just a short walk down the slope, past the cottonwood trees and across a rocky patch. The air grew cooler as he got closer, and the soft sound of running water reached his ears. But as he approached the trap, something unusual happened. He heard a sound, and sharp and sudden. It wasn't the sound of an animal struggling. It was a cry, a human cry. Thomas froze. He tightened his grip on the knife but didn't move forward right away. Out here, a human voice could mean danger. Sometimes strangers pass through these lands, some peaceful, some not. Thomas took a step closer, slowly. The sound came again, clearer this time. It was a girl's voice, full of fear. His heart began to beat faster. He crouched low and moved through the bushes until he finally saw what was caught in his trap. It wasn't a turkey. It wasn't a deer, it was a girl. She was young, maybe 16, with long dark hair and skin the color of the warm earth. Her clothes were simple, soft buckskin stitched with care. Her ankle was caught in the trap but not broken. She was breathing fast, her eyes wide with terror as she saw Thomas appear from behind the brush. She pulled against the trap, trying to free herself, but it only made the metal bite harder. Thomas raised his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. He could see the fear in her eyes. She was Apache. That much was clear. He had seen Apache people from a distance before, though he had never spoken to one. There was tension between settlers and Apache bands. Each side feared the other. Each side had stories, some true, some not. Thomas knew how dangerous misunderstandings could be in this land. The girl's breathing grew sharper. Her hands were clenched into fists. She was not weak. Even in pain, she stared at him as if ready to fight. Thomas took a careful step forward. He spoke softly, though he knew she might not understand his language. "Easy," he said. "I won't hurt you." The girl flinched but did not look away. She didn't trust him. She had no reason to. To her, he might have been just another settler, one who could harm her or worse. She tried to push herself away from the trap, but she couldn't move. Thomas slowly knelt near the trap, keeping his hands visible. He pointed at the trap, then at her ankle, trying to show her what he intended. She didn't relax. Her muscles were tense like a cornered animal, but she stopped struggling for a moment. The trap had not cut deeply, but her ankle was red and sore. Thomas reached out gently. She jerked back. He paused, waited, then tried again. Finally, she allowed him to touch the trap, though her eyes never left his face. He carefully released the spring and pulled the metal apart. The trap opened with a sharp click and her leg slipped free. The girl let out a soft breath. Not relief exactly, but something close. She tried to stand, but winced in pain. Thomas took a step back so she wouldn't feel trapped again. He didn't reach for her. He simply let her see that she was free. She rubbed her ankle, still watching him closely. Thomas noticed her breathing slow a little, but she was ready to run if she had to. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. She might not have understood the words, but she understood his tone. She shook her head slightly. Thomas looked around. The land was empty for now. but he knew leaving her alone in this condition could be dangerous. There were wild animals, rough men, and long miles between any settlements. He also knew that if her people found him with her, they might think the worst. But something inside him told him he couldn't just walk away. He took off his worn flannel shirt and ripped the bottom of it to make a soft bandage. The girl stiffened again when he stepped forward, but he moved slowly, gently wrapping the cloth around her ankle to ease the pressure. He didn't touch her more than he had to. She watched him like a hawk, ready to pull back at any second. When he was done, he stepped away and raised his hands again to show he was finished. She lowered her gaze to the bandage, then back to him. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and something shifted. Her fear didn't disappear, but there was a flicker of confusion. She had expected cruelty. Instead, he had given her help. A cool breeze passed through the canyon. Thomas stood there for a while, unsure what to do next. He could see that she couldn't walk far on her own. The nearest water source was close, but her home, wherever it was, might be miles away. He decided to help her reach safety, but carefully. Thomas gestured toward the stream and then toward his small cabin on the hill. He didn't move closer, only pointed and waited. She looked toward the direction he was pointing. The cabin was not visible from here, but the hill was. Her brow tightened. She didn't trust going anywhere with him, not yet. Thomas didn't push her. Instead, he walked to the stream, filled his pail with clean water, and returned to place it near her without saying a word. Then he stepped back again. The girl hesitated. Then slowly she reached out for the pail and drank a little. Her lips were dry. She hadn't had water for some time. She set it down carefully, still watching him. They stayed like that for a long while, not enemies but not friends either. Two strangers caught in the same piece of land, trying to understand each other without words. Thomas finally crouched near a tree, making sure to keep a good distance between them. He didn't want her to feel cornered. The girl rested her ankle and looked toward the horizon as if wondering if her people were near. She was brave. Even injured, she sat upright, alert to every sound. As the sun climbed higher, the mist disappeared and the air grew warmer. Thomas knew that staying out in the open wasn't safe for either of them. He also knew that she might not follow him unless she saw he meant no harm. He slowly stood, slung the pail over his shoulder, and started walking up the path toward his cabin, without looking back. He hoped she would trust her instincts enough to follow, or at least not fear him completely. Behind him, he heard a soft movement. She was trying to stand, putting weight on her good leg. He didn't turn around. He wanted her to choose freely. After a moment, the sound of her steps reached him again, soft, slow, uneven. She was following. That was the first small thread of trust, fragile but real. Thomas walked slowly so she could keep up. He didn't speak. He didn't look back. He just led the way up the hill, past the cottonwoods and the rocky path toward the small cabin that stood like a quiet shelter under the wide blue sky. Neither of them knew what would happen next. But in that silent walk, something rare began. Not friendship yet, but the beginning of understanding. And that, on that cool spring morning, was how a simple trap set for game brought two very different lives together. Thomas led the way slowly, keeping a soft pace as he walked up the hill toward his small cabin. He didn't look back too often, but he could hear the sound of her steps behind him, uneven, careful, but determined. She was hurt, but she was strong. The sun climbed higher, casting warm light on the path. Birds flew from branch to branch above them, and the sound of the stream faded behind. When they finally reached the cabin, Thomas stepped aside so she wouldn't feel trapped. The cabin was made of old logs and stones, nothing fancy, but it was strong against the wind. A small chair sat outside near a wooden table. There was also a big water barrel and a few tools lying neatly against the wall. This was his world, quiet, simple, far from the noise of towns. He opened the door gently and stepped in, leaving it open behind him. That way, she could see he wasn't trying to keep her inside. He moved to the corner, picked up a blanket and placed it on the chair outside. Then he pointed at it and stepped away. She stayed near the doorway, uncertain. Her eyes scanned everything. The table, the old rifle on the wall, the pot near the fire pit. She didn't trust him fully yet, but the fact that she had followed him at all meant something had already changed. Thomas took the pail of water and placed it near her, Then he reached into a small basket and pulled out a few pieces of bread. He didn't offer it directly. He simply set it down on the table and walked a few steps back. The girl watched him carefully, then slowly stepped closer. She touched the bread as if unsure if she was allowed to take it. When she saw he wasn't stopping her, she picked up a piece and ate in small bites. He watched her quietly. She ate slowly, still alert, but the fear in her eyes wasn't as sharp as before. She was exhausted. Her body was tense, but her spirit was strong. Thomas respected that. As the hours passed, she sat on the chair with the blanket around her shoulders. Thomas worked nearby, repairing one of his fishing nets. He didn't talk much, not only because they didn't speak the same language, but also because silence was his way of showing she was safe. No orders, no shouting, no threat. Just quiet. When the sun began to set, the air grew cooler. Thomas lit a small fire near the cabin to keep the chill away. The orange light flickered across the trees, and the smell of burning wood filled the air. The girl sat a little closer to the fire now, rubbing her hands together to warm them. She still didn't say a word, but the distance between them felt less wide than it had that morning. That night, Thomas slept inside the cabin on his small cot, but he left the door open and gave her space to sleep near the fire if she wished. He didn't want her to feel cornered. She didn't sleep much. He could tell from the soft sound of her shifting during the night. She was listening to the forest, to him, to everything around her. She didn't trust the silence yet. By the second day, her ankle had begun to heal a little. She could stand with more strength now, though she still limped when she walked. Thomas made a soft bandage again, wrapping it carefully without saying a word. She allowed him to do it this time without pulling away. Her hands no longer trembled. That morning, Thomas boiled water and cooked a simple stew with dried vegetables and a little meat. He placed a bowl near her, then sat down with his own bowl a short distance away. She hesitated again, but soon started to eat. This time her eyes lifted once or twice to look at him. It wasn't trust yet, but it was no longer pure fear. After they ate, she stood and walked a few steps toward the trees, testing her strength. Thomas didn't follow her closely. He just stood at the edge of the clearing, letting her know she was free to move. She looked around as if trying to recognize the land. Maybe she was looking for familiar signs that pointed toward her people. She seemed lost in thought. Thomas watched quietly. He knew she would leave soon. She didn't belong here with him. She belonged with her people, her family, her world. But until she was strong enough to walk without pain, he would not let her face the wild alone. On the third day, something changed between them. It was a small thing, a simple moment. Thomas had been splitting firewood when he suddenly lost his balance, dropping a heavy log near his foot. It startled her, and she rushed forward without even thinking. She reached out, steadying the log before it rolled further. For the first time, they moved together, not as strangers, but as people sharing a single moment. Thomas gave her a small, grateful nod. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened a little. That night, they sat closer to the fire than before. She still didn't speak, but her posture was no longer tight. She rested her hands on her knees, staring into the flames. Thomas thought about how strange and unexpected this all was. A few days ago, she had been caught in his trap, full of fear. Now she was sitting by his fire, wrapped in one of his blankets, no longer trying to run. But he also knew this couldn't last forever. She needed to go home. Her people were somewhere out there, and they might be searching for her even now. The longer she stayed, the more dangerous it could become for both of them if they were found together. He didn't want trouble for her or for himself. On the fourth morning, the sky was bright and clear. Birds were singing again, and the cool breeze carried the smell of wet earth. Thomas stepped outside early, looking at the ridgeline in the distance. That was the direction she had glanced at many times. He guessed that her home might be somewhere beyond those hills. He walked back inside and found her sitting near the fire pit, carefully wrapping the bandage around her ankle herself. She looked stronger. When their eyes met, she seemed to understand what he was thinking, that it was time. Thomas filled a small leather pouch with dried bread and water. He didn't say anything. He just placed it on the table near her. She looked at it, then at him. For the first time, their silence felt clear. She understood. He motioned toward the hills. She stood slowly, tested her ankle, and nodded. As they walked together toward the edge of the forest, the world seemed both quiet and alive. The ground was soft beneath their feet, and the wind whispered through the trees. They didn't rush. There was no reason to. Halfway up the hill, she stopped. She turned toward him and looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes held something he couldn't fully explain, a mix of gratitude, strength, and something softer, something that didn't need words. Thomas handed her the pouch. She took it carefully, holding it close. Then she pointed toward the hills, touched her chest lightly, and nodded. It wasn't a goodbye spoken out loud, but it was clear. She was going home. He stepped back and watched as she began walking toward the horizon. Her steps were slow at first, then steadier. The wind lifted her hair and the sun painted her path in gold. She didn't look back right away. She walked until the forest began to blend with the hills. Then just once she turned. Their eyes met across the distance. For that brief moment, the world grew quiet again. There were no walls between them, no fear, no past. Just two people who had shared something simple yet powerful: trust. She gave a small nod, then disappeared into the trees. Thomas stood there for a long time, listening to the wind. His cabin behind him felt different now. Not because anything had changed in it, but because he had changed. He hadn't spoken a single clear word to her, yet their silence had said everything that needed to be said. In the days that followed, he often walked down to the stream, past the spot where the trap had once been. The trap was still there, but now he saw it differently. That simple piece of metal had brought a stranger into his life, changed something deep inside him, and reminded him of something he hadn't felt in a long time: connection. Years later, Thomas would still think about that morning. He never learned her name. He never saw her again, but he carried the memory like a quiet flame. In a land full of fear and mistrust, two people who should have been enemies shared a moment of kindness. And sometimes that single moment is enough to last a lifetime.